information coming from the opposition forces. Citizens are afraid to talk in fear of being arrested. Roosevelt Scarrett has embarked on a campaign to tarnish the reputation of those who legitimately opposed his electoral legislation, which legitimizes his fraudulent elections. Freedom of expression is under attack in the Commonwealth of Dominica. Join the Electoral Reform Coalition and a panel of professional Caribbean journalists to discuss Free Press, Our Safeguard to Democracy. The Commonwealth of Dominica sinks into a brutal dictatorship. The silence hurts. 7:30 p.m. Saturday, April 5th, 2025.
Politicians hold significant power to shape the future for you and me through the right decisions, policies, and leadership. They can either empower the young people or create barriers that will stifle our ambition and potential to be the best we can be. So, Mr. PM, what's going on? The more we try and try, we still staying down. You created an illusion, an imagination of a bright, prosperous, wealthy nation. Some call you a mama Gaia, I call you a heartbreaker and a dream killer. We had plenty hope, but now we can't cope. You're a dream killer. Disregard of mental health while you busy gaining wealth. You're a dream killer. Some in NEP working for small money. You're a dream killer. You present a lot of things, we believe in you. No our life passing by, nothing coming through. Made a lot of promises, fulfilling a few. Then is big celebration for us to praise you. Hey, we have a dream. Oh, our children have a dream. So many sent overseas to study, especially those who support the party. Them workers were blue bags that their parents gave you the X. But every time Felicia come on Facebook Live, the thing she exposing makes me want to cry. And I wonder why you acting so sly and how my peers getting by. They say a promise is a comfort to a fool. Some cannot graduate, you don't pay the school. All we hear is excuses and more promises, while the students down on their knees. Some call you a big trickster, I call you a heartbreaker and a dream killer. We had plenty hope, but now we can't cope. a dream killer. Disregard of mental health while you busy gaining wealth. You're a dream killer. Some in NEP working for small money. You're a dream killer. You present a lot of things. We believe in you. Now our life passing by, nothing coming through. It is so embarrassing while you there smiling. Baby gets at rambling, the college waiting. Hey, oh, if Felicia had a dream. I have a dream. With hard work and determination, we can reach our destination.
violence, and propaganda to control the narrative. Their first instinct is to silence the press, because a silenced press means an uninformed people, and an uninformed people are easier to control. And perhaps most poignantly, Nobel laureate Maria Reese, in her How to Stand Up to a Dictator, The Fight for Our Future, shares a first-hand battle against disinformation and political intimidation. She writes, if you want to rip the heart out of a democracy, you go after facts. Maria reminds us that journalism is activism in the name of truth, and that truth is under attack. What happened on March 19th is not just a national concern. It is part of a regional and global pattern that we must resist. A free press is not the enemy of the state. It is the voice of the people. It is the mirror to power, the heartbeat of public discourse, and the guardian of accountability. When a journalist is assaulted, so too is every citizen's right to ask questions. When a camera is broken, so too is the public's window into truth. When the press is silenced, democracy itself is gone. Let this forum be a space of reflection, of resistance, and of recommitment to protect press freedom, to speak out when it is under threat, and to ensure that our democracies remain vibrant, transparent, and just. Before I introduce our distinguished panelists, I would like to call on the chairman of the Electoral Reform Coalition, ERC, Mr. Johnson Boston, to make a few brief remarks. Mr. Boston, you may proceed.
Thank you so much, Alvin, and let me say good night to the presenters and to all those who are on here with us tonight. And I think it's a very appropriate theme. Free press, our safeguard to democracy. And Alvin rightly said it, that every democracy requires a free press to operate, not as the enemy of the state, but as an opportunity to provide information to the people so that people can make informed choices. So again, thank you for accepting for being here with us tonight. The question of electoral reform has been on the road for quite some time. And of course, in the 2019 general election, which was a snap election, the first parliament that was held following that election, the Prime Minister said the most vexing issue in the campaign was electoral reform. And in the first 100 days, he would appoint to decide all those administrators in the region to study on the reform and present the report. Then the Prime was appointed to that song, and then he agreed to have done the draft of the legislation, which the Prime Minister agreed to and provided additional money so he could appoint somebody to assist him to be drafted. In 2022, November 2022, and October, November, he wrote to the Prime Minister and then leader of the opposition to indicate to them that his work was nearing completion, and in the first quarter of 2023, he would present his report. We had our independence, and on the 6th of November, the Prime Minister addressed the nation and asked the President to dissolve the House for another general election, which we dubbed the sham election. The ERC was formed on the 7th of November 2022. And we felt that since we had not accomplished anything in terms of electoral reform, that the election was not something in the interest of the country, and will further improve our democracy, and therefore the major parties decided not to contest, and having had an advice from the Caribbean Court of Justice that our election procedures in Dominica were tainted, and therefore another election should not be held under those circumstances. So no party contested the election. And I don't want to go into the full detail of that because we saw 19 seats in the government. Some contested, a few of them, and some went unopposed. And there were two independents also in Maryland that won and are in Parliament. We organized a discussion early January, and we brought Senator Adam Roberts from Trinidad and Tobago to talk with us on the question of electoral reform and how a reform that is not proper would affect democracies not only in Dominica but in the region. We then wrote the Prime Minister on the 29th of January and asked him for a meeting with the ERC, and that meeting we suggest for the 15th of February 2024. When the Prime Minister received the letter, he called and he said that the 15th was not a convenient date for him, but we did send in the letter the 15th or a date convenient to you as Prime Minister. And he said he would set a date and invite us. But we had asked in that letter that we would want to discuss 3 other areas with him if time permits. And he asked me on behalf of the ERC to identify the 3 other areas and the list of persons that would meet with him. And we did write back and said that the 3 other areas we will discuss with you if time permits is the airport project, the CBI program, and the rural zone settlement project. And we said to him that the list would have been sent to you when you give a date, because some of the members may not be available when that did come, and we have to be making changes and so on. Then that went on, we did several follow-up to no avail. Also asked to meet with the votes to the president for a meeting, and also the chairman of the Electoral Commission with his team. The president granted us an audience. We had a very good meeting, cordial meeting with the president. She had invited the Attorney General at that meeting, and we discussed, and she said to us it would have been nice if we had met the Electoral Commission and the Prime Minister's cabinet before we meet. We said to her that we had made those requests, we tried, and nothing happened. We did several follow-up letters to no avail from the Prime Minister. We then reached a point where we had a meeting on the riverbank in Roseau under the Acts, and adopted the People's Parliament, where we move a motion and then we present that to the government. But we did only talk. We made recommendations, and we had it in short-term, medium, and long-term recommendations to the government. And government never took us on. We asked for a broad-based committee involving members of the ERC, the government, persons, the opposition, and other civil society organizations. Nothing happened in this regard. Then the Prime Minister, when the report was received from Sir Dennis Byron, he had what you call an opportunity or ceremonial to make the reports available to the various groups and organizations in the society. Then we have a consultation, that's the ERC, at UWI Center, and gave some lawyers and some other prominent individuals in the society to discuss. We look at today's Byron report, the recommendations that we made, the old laws governing the electoral process in Dominica, and we made further recommendations to the government. Then when the Prime Minister held his consultation around the country and he invited the political parties in Roseau at the State House conference room, we went and made presentation there where we participated. And across the country, some people went to those consultations. Then the question of campaign finance regulation was something that Sir Dennis Byron, in his report, recommended. And also the situation with the voters list, having have a population of say about 70,000 people, and the list was more than 74,000 voters on the list. We felt that was very troubling to us, and of course to a democracy in which we want to operate, and that you have a level playing field for everybody who wants to participate in the electoral process. In fact, the Prime Minister himself went around and gave the impression to those at the consultation that they themselves organized in a way to suit them, and said that the opposition wanted him to take monies from the treasury to give them to run their campaign, and that was, not true at all. So Sir Dennis Byron, in his investigation, recognized the kind of money that was spent by the incumbent and left the opposing party or parties without the same amount or something to be able to compete fairly, and recommended some level of campaign finance and regulation so that we could have a more playing field in terms of our election and for persons to be free to participate in the process. We continue. When the Prime Minister then appointed a committee, said headed by the Attorney General, and he said, if any recommendation
We're not hearing you, boss, so we're not hearing you.
Your mic is muted, boss.
We're not hearing you. Okay.
only while you were hearing or just now?
No, just this last minute or so.
Okay.
Yeah. But you okay. I guess you're winding up, right?
Yes, I'm winding up here.
Okay. All right.
So we have made all of this effort to ensure that we could have an amicable resolution in this matter, because we believe these three vexing issues in the bill, more particularly the voters list and campaign financing, and therefore we never had the opportunity to meet with the government or the Electoral Commission to discuss those stuff. Then, come December 16, 2024, the Prime Minister went to Parliament. A few people showed up there and said they were having the first reading of the bill, and then the second and third reading would come in the first quarter of 2025. When we heard that they were going to Parliament on the 19th, we wrote a letter ahead of time to the Prime Minister to ask him if the bills were on the other paper for discussion at that sitting. We asked if they received any recommendation and if there are any amendments to the bill. And if so, can you please share with us and the public at large? We got no response from the Prime Minister on this matter. And then the Parliament on the 19th met and we organized for a peaceful gathering around Parliament. Parliament was all blocked up from everywhere, so we stood around the roundabout close to Fort Young. And of course, the road was already blocked by the police and so forth. And the rest we have all seen the photos. So let me just thank you for coming and for being with us, and to say to you, we made every effort in a civilized society to ensure that we could have a good discussion with the Prime Minister and his cabinet, so we could arrive at a sensible electoral reform bill for Dominica. The ERC is made up of prominent Dominicans, professionals, persons from the public service, retired persons from the public service, from the police service, from all the professionals, locally and abroad, Dominicans in the diaspora, and Dominicans locally. And we are all law-abiding citizens. We all believe in our country, and we want what is best for our country. And we always said that a reform bill is not only for now, or the Labour Party, but it is for Dominica and the future generation. Therefore, it's very sad and unfortunate that we arrive at a situation where the government went to Parliament to pass this bill without addressing the question of campaign financing as well as the situation on the voter on the voter registration. So again, thank you. And
Right. Thank you, Mr. Boston. Thank you for that very concise reporting on where we started as in the RCA and as a people and where we are today. Again, folks, the conversation, as I said, gears around free press and our democracy. And based on what Mr. Boston has just shared with us, clearly shows, therefore, that we have to depend on the press to disseminate information. And I think that is one of the challenges that we face in Dominica. As we speak, for example, there are three major radio stations on island, apart from one or two others: Diary FM, Q95, and DBS Radio, state-owned radio. As I understand it, the ERC have made repeated and several attempts to speak to the citizens of Dominica on the matter of electoral reform on the state-owned radio, and have agreed to pay and have been denied access. More recently, when the ERC, just before the March 19th assembly, they put together a press conference which they wanted carried live via Q95 and Kyrie FM. And although they undertook to pay for that Kyrie FM, they were denied. So clearly, that is not something that one would want to encourage in a democracy. Hence, the reason why we're having that conversation. Because as I reference in the various authors and the books that I reference, democracy and tyranny can creep in very slowly. It's like a thief in the night. And there are two areas that are attacked. First, the military or the police. So you get the police under your control, and then you go after the press. So no information is disseminated out of the country or comes into the country. And then they will look at the trade unions and maybe the trades. So I think our conversation tonight is quite opportune. We have four presenters, persons in the media that will present within a 6-minute presentation. Those persons are Mr. Anthony Drago. Mr. Drago is host of This Week in Interview, a weekly program here on TDN Media, online radio and TV. This Week Interview is currently running in the 15th year and deals with personalities, events, health, economics, and social issues. Anthony is also part of the management team of TDN Media and is committed to providing a platform for those whose access to mainstream media is restricted for political or other reasons. We also have with us this evening another presenter in the person of Mr. Tim Durham. Mr. Durham first worked as a broadcaster with DBS Radio for 14 years, with 9 of those as program director and occasionally acting manager. Public grower relations manager at the Dominica Banana Marketing Corporation for 13 years. He was also the news director with Marpin Telecom and Broadcasting for 9 years. And is currently the managing director of his own media outlet, Dominica News Online. We most likely will be joined as well this evening, hopefully, by Mr. Julian Rogers. I think most of us here are familiar with that name, those who are old enough. Mr. Rogers is a veteran Caribbean broadcaster, columnist, and media consultant with decades of experience covering regional affairs and deep commitment to Caribbean unity. So hopefully Mr. Rogers will share his views on the topic this evening. And finally, we have Mr. Jeffrey Tavares. Mr. Tavares is Jamaican but based in Florida, and he's from Jam Talk Vibes Internet Radio Station. And there is a talk show that he runs entitled Make We Talk. Jeffrey Tavares LLC is also run on his YouTube channel, as well as being the host of that Make We Talk host show. There were two other veterans in the region that unfortunately not been able to be with us, and they asked that I convey their apologies. And that would have been Mr. Wesley Gibbons. He was the former president of the Media Workers of the Caribbean. He is currently engaged in an assignment this evening in Trinidad. As you know, Trinidad elections are right around the corner. So he's actively engaged in that. And then we also have Mr. Julius Gittins. He's a media lecturer and former producer of the Caribbean News Agency. As we speak, he's traveling. So unfortunately, he won't be able to join us. But they have both asked that I convey the best wishes and the apologies to you this evening. So having done that introduction of our panelists, I'm going to call on our first panelist, who is Mr. Tim Durant, to do his presentation. Following that, we will move to the other panelists, and then we'll open up the line for engagement, interaction from you, the guests. Mr. Tim Durant, you may proceed.
Well, Alvin, thank you very much, and a very good evening to everyone listening. I just want to begin by saying that I did play some cricket in my youth, not at a very high level, but I was never an opening batsman. So I guess I'm given this task this evening to prove, how well I might have done if I were an opening batsman.
Well, I knew that. Being an old boy of SMA, I knew that part, but I choose not to disclose it.
Well, I hope you're not setting me up to get out for duck, man. Anyway, well, thank you, Alvin, for inviting me to be a presenter this evening. Well, when we spoke, I did not interpret my role as that of presenter, but as a participant. But I'm going to take up the challenge. And then thank you for all of you who are joining us this evening. My understanding of the reason for us being here this evening and this meeting is to assess the situation, the incident that occurred during the protest for electoral reform, in which the young lady who represented Igbo News was harassed and, I dare say to a certain extent, assaulted by the police in Dominica. And hopefully what we can do coming out of this exercise tonight is to come up with some real suggestions as to how we can deal with such a situation, how we can actually address it so that the situation will become better, will improve for Dominican journalists and for the whole idea of the ability of the media to participate in a fundamental aspect of our constitution, and that is freedom of expression. And so with what I want to tell you, first of all, that my experience in the media goes all the way back to the 70s, when radio was really a fledgling undertaking. Or it started with GDS radio, and then it started rather with Radio Dominica and evolved into GDS radio. And from the onset of radio, at that time, we understood that it was a state entity, in that it was controlled by the state, and therefore it represented whatever the information that the state wanted to disseminate. But eventually, that although it hasn't changed significantly in terms of structure, except that it became a statutory corporation in the 70s, 1976, I believe, but it has essentially remained a state functionary. And this is one of the problems that we face in this country for a number of years now, that we have not been able to establish and to develop the radio station into the type of entity that provides information as it is mandated to do for the country, as opposed to for a political party controlling the government of the day. And so we've had to deal with that, over the years. I personally ended up leaving EBS Radio in 1989 to take up another responsibility, another job at the DDMC, because I was not satisfied, with the fact that the station was still being politically controlled, and journalists who operated there then did not have the freedom, the liberty to ply their craft, in a manner that was commensurate with the responsibility of bringing information to the public in an objective, fettered and uninfluenced way. And so therefore, I felt that even if at the time I was offered the post of manager of the station, I felt that it would simply put me in a situation where I would have had to be battling the authorities every day to get my job done. And so I left. And this has not changed. And it touches on the point that Alvin made a short while ago. And that is, even today, when organizations like the ARC and others are prepared to pay for airspace and airtime, they are denied because the information that it is anticipated that they will be disseminating in the air on the airtime that they have been granted will be anti-government, or are perceived to be anti-government. It's not in keeping with the government's idea of the information that should be disseminated to the public. And so we have that situation. And coupled with that, now we have an even more compounded problem with the police having reached the stage now where they see themselves as conveyors, of the, if you will, the conveyors of the objectives of the government. In other words, the police no longer see themselves as impartial protectors of peace and the law, but they see themselves as representing the government. And what happened on that fateful day of the electoral reform, where this young lady, this young journalist, was harassed by the police, is a reflection of what is happening now, and that the police see themselves firmly as being there to do the bidding of the government. And so, on that particular day, my own position about what happened is that I believe that, and we must be clear when we criticize the police, when we assess their performance and come to our own conclusions, we must be clear that not all policemen actually, espouse that belief or that type of behavior. But many of the policemen in the force have a sense of what their real duty entails. But there are others who are using the opportunity. And I want to say very boldly that the individual who was involved in harassing the young lady, even if he knew that it was being filmed, even if he knew that it was going to be relayed all over the world, he didn't care, because he saw this opportunity as one in which he could advance, and to use his own word, advance his standing with the government, because his ambition and his desire is to be promoted in the force. And those of you who are here from the local media, I don't know how many of you who live abroad would be privy to this information. But the background information about that particular individual is that he has been political, very political. His allegiance lay with another party, previously an opposition party, and then that changed because he saw an opportunity with the ruling party to move forward, to obtain the promotion, to advance in his position. And so that is what I think. In his particular case, motivated his behavior. There are others like him in the force. And I think this is where we are now. So it puts the police force in a situation where, because they are individuals in there who are prepared to behave in that manner so as to, if you will, position themselves to benefit, from whatever it is the government has to offer for loyal behavior, then it puts the police force in this situation where we as a people are beginning to wonder whether there can ever be the kind of relationship between the police force and the public that provides, the assurance that the police is there to protect us and to do their work as law enforcement officers objectively and fairly. And unfortunately, this is not the case. And I think there are many things. I mean, we can point to a number of things that can be done, a number of factors that may be responsible for the way that the police behave, but and we could point to things that could be done too, such as having discussions with the police, ensuring that we recommend stuff like conflict training that will enable them to be able to better handle situations of that nature. But I think ultimately it is going to be very difficult to resolve this problem, because once the powers that be, the leaders of this country at the moment, are prepared to support what the police is doing, in their name. So, in other words, since that incident, we have not heard any utterance from any government minister or the prime minister suggesting that, hey, perhaps you didn't behave properly, perhaps you didn't behave according to the expectations of the public in terms of what you're supposed to be doing as a police officer. We have not heard that. We have not heard anybody come out and say, well, look, we apologize. We did not, behave properly. We did not handle the situation properly. And so I have come to the conclusion, and I believe that what happened is sanctioned by the government, and therefore it is going to be extremely difficult to change the situation by improving the relationship between the police and the public, by facilitating opportunities for the police to be trained, to be made aware that their behavior is unwarranted. It is not serving the best interest of the country. And we have a problem that needs to be resolved by addressing it from a political standpoint. So I would say this, that with the current situation as is, we cannot forsake the whole notion of trying to bring the police and the community together, trying to find some common ground between the police and the community. But we have to understand that there is a political undertone to this whole thing. It is driven by politics, and we have to resolve the political aspect of that situation before we can, arrive at a resolution that is acceptable to the populace of this country. So, what I would like us to do this evening, because we all agree that what happened was totally unwarranted. What happened was a violation of democracy, of the fundamental rights of journalists, and other journalists to do their work effectively. And as such, we need to find a way to be able to get that message across to the politicians. And if the politicians cannot do anything about it, if they're not prepared to accept that something is wrong, if they continue to provide support to the police, and if there continues to be a number of policemen within the ranks of the police force who are prepared to act on behalf of the government, irregardless of what is required of them, then we need to be mindful that the journey is a long one, and we have to find a way to resolve this political impasse and situation which is now with the country. Alvin, I'm sorry I went a little overboard, but thank you.
No, Tim, you did very well. Thank you. Fantastic. Great presentation. And like I said, you are a veteran in the business. You've seen it all. You've worked on the various political administration, going way back into the 70s, at least 4 different political administrations. So I think you can speak with a certain level of authority as it relates to media matters. So thank you very much for that concise and informed presentation. Let me just kind of reiterate something that Tim says, and I think he ended, and that too is the intention. What is the way forward? What do we do from there? And do we just shut our mouth and stay silent, say nothing, do nothing, see nothing? Or do we do something? And if we need to do something, what is it doing that we're supposed to do? The officer in question presumably was the one in command on the day of the assembly, because he was the one who manhandled and assaulted the journalist. And then he was the one giving the orders to advance. It wasn't even 2 weeks after that incident of March the 17th. This individual was promoted to the second highest level in the police force. He is now the Deputy Chief Police Officer in the Commonwealth of Dominica. Someone who assaulted a journalist, and we'll see the clip in a while, in the manner it was done, is now the second in command as the Deputy Chief of Police. So the question remains, what message are you sending to your subordinate? I guess the constable, the sergeant, the inspector, the superintendent, the assistant superintendent, all the way down. It's okay now that if there is an assembly in Roseau or protest or whatever you want to call it, that they feel it is okay to manhandle Tim, to manhandle Matt, to manhandle Curtis, to manhandle all the various journalists that are on the island. In a real society, in a real country, one would have expected some sort of inquiry, or at least a pause, and have this gentleman, pause for a while, look into the matter. And if maybe later on, yes, he can be promoted. But less than 2 weeks, he was promoted to the second highest position in the police force. So, folks, we have something very serious ahead of us. But before I call on to the next person to present, who would be Mr. Jeffrey Tavares, before I call him on, to present, our producer will just, for those of you who may not have seen the clip, or maybe didn't quite pick up everything from that clip, our producer will now play the clip. And let me also say that the journalist in question, I see she's here with us, Sonia Benjamin. Good evening, Sonia. Good that you could have joined us. I'm not too sure. It's up to her if she would like to say anything, but the mere fact she's there is good. If she chooses to, that's fine. If not, because as I understand it, some whatever legal matters need to be looked at. So again, I just want to recognize Ms. Benjamin who's here with us. Yes, producer, please play that clip.
Vicinity of the Parliament, intending to voice their concerns about the electoral bill. However, they were blocked by barricades and a significant police presence that prevented them from approaching the building. Tensions escalated when law enforcement officers moved to disperse the crowd, deploying tear gas and forcibly removing demonstrators from the area. Concerns over media freedom intensified after a journalist live streaming the protest was harassed by a senior police officer. The officer grabbed her equipment several times, abruptly ending the broadcast. Press freedom advocates have condemned the act, calling it a direct violation of the public's right to information. Despite widespread public opposition, critics say the controversial Electors Act and 2 related bills were pushed through the legislative process without adequate consultation. Legal analysts have warned that the new laws could severely limit voter rights and concentrate political power in the hands of the ruling Labour Party government. Amid growing unrest, allegations have surfaced of political intimidation targeting a prominent opposition member at their home. Critics argue that such actions are part of a pattern, as the police have reportedly employed similar tactics in the past to instill fear and stifle dissent. They frame this as another instance of police harassment against political opponents. Legal experts warn that the combination of police force, fast-track legislation, and political harassment points to a concerning shift toward authoritarian rule under the guise of democratic governance. Some citizens have reported police misconduct and abuse of authority and have begun filing claims with human rights organizations. Critics are urging the government to uphold democratic principles and engage with public concerns rather than silencing dissent. Citizens must be able to question, criticize, and protest without fear, one critic said. When a government responds with force instead of dialogue, democracy itself is endangered. The situation in Dominica is drawing increased international attention. It is left to see how the authorities will respond to growing public dissent in the coming days. This is a developing story.
Okay, thank you for that insert. Let me now move quickly to Mr. Jeffrey Tarves. Jeffrey, can you hear me? Are you with us? Jeffrey?
Right here.
Okay, great. Well, you've heard so far from the previous presenters, and I know you've done some interviews with Gabriel Christian and I think Dr. Thompson Fountain, and you had some conversation with me as well. And so I take it you are pretty much following what's on the ground. As a journalist yourself, media practitioner, could you first of all speak to what you saw in the video and from the information that you have available, and maybe you might want to contrast that, if necessary, if that's the case, with whatever patterns you might be seeing in the rest of the region.
Good night, everyone. I'm Jeffrey Tavares from the Make Me Talk program. I was on my program one day, and I saw breaking news came across my phone that Dominica is in serious problem. You all are hearing me clearly?
Yes, we are. Yes.
Yeah. That Dominica is in serious problem. And I said to myself, what on earth is going on here? So I switched to the video and I started talking about it. And then I saw the video where the policeman was pushing the young lady. It reminds me of my beloved island, Jamaica. And when you see things like that start happening, when you see governments start arming the police and the army against its own citizens, there is something fundamentally wrong somewhere. And I sat there and I watched the video over and over and over. I have people call into the program and people giving, their input. In interviewing my good friend Gabriel and Dr. Thompson, I get a whole drift of what is going on. And if you look around the Caribbean, a lot of media personnel are afraid to come on mainstream media and speak about the level of corruption in government, even in Jamaica. Because they're afraid of their own life, they're afraid of their own family, may get hurt. And when you see a government arming its own security force against the people, then the people are going to get afraid to come out and say anything. For example, last night I was at a forum where the Prime Minister of Jamaica was in Florida, and I got up to ask a question. Someone came to me and said to me, "What question are you asking?" When I told the person the question that I was going to ask about 28 bank accounts that the Prime Minister has, and also about the whole thing with Cuba and China, I was only allowed to ask one question. And the question was pensions for Jamaicans living overseas. That is to show you that they'll go to the level of silencing the press from bringing out what they're supposed to bring out. And I will say to my fellow journalists and podcasters on this platform here, and those who are listening to me, if you cannot find a way to present what is going on in individual countries, and if you have to take to social media, do so. Because social media is taking over mainstream media. It cannot be that Dominica is a sister country of all of us in CARICOM. And CARICOM is silent on this. You don't hear one single member of CARICOM says anything about what is going on in Dominica. And I'm afraid that obviously Dominica is going to become the next Haiti of the Caribbean. And for that young lady who the police manhandled, don't stop doing your work. Do your work to the best of your ability. If those who are on this media here has anything to put out and you're afraid to put it out, send it to me. Send it to me. A lot of my friends are saying last night I was afraid to ask. I was not afraid to ask any question last night. But when you survey the room that you're in, you have to be very careful. If they came on my platform, no one could stop me from asking the question I want to ask. And I say tonight, all those opposition members in Dominica and the citizens of Dominica who are being locked up by their own government, it happened in Jamaica before. Happened in Jamaica before. And we must not give up. We must not stand by and let a totalitarian country, a totalitarian government rather, a wannabe dictator take over from us. They must understand that we the people have a say. We the people put them there. And we the people can take them down in the sense of an election. And the people of Dominica, do not give up. Continue fighting the fight for a better Dominica. Obviously, it seems as if these leaders around the Caribbean have secrets for each other. And obviously, some of the leaders around the Caribbean do not love their people. They love the power and the greed that they can get. And we must stand up for each other within the media fraternity. We all must stand up for each other in the media fraternity, and we must not give up. And we must not let each other down. We must come together as a family. If we have to have WhatsApp group, let's have WhatsApp group. But we must come together as a family and fight the good fight for freedom of the press, for the people of our countries. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey, for those passionate presentation. I like the note that you ended on. It's a family. We have to come together as a family. I mean, I'm from Dominica, as everyone knows. I remember in the 70s and maybe the 80s to some extent, early 90s, you had a very vibrant media association. I mean, you had the persons, as you said, you had the Tim Dura, you had the Ken Richard, you had the Sherman Green, you had Mikey, you had, I mean, the list could go on and on and on and on. And it was a very vibrant media association. And they report on stuff. I remember, I mean, the Patrick John, they report on matters as it relates to Patrick John Parliament. They report on Eugenia Charles. They would go to press conference and they would grill Eugenia at press conference and ask questions. And what you saw in those press conferences with the media at the time, you had ministers answering the questions. So you had someone like Alan Carbon who would have to talk on communication. Eugenia not going to answer communication for you. The Minister of Agriculture would be. And even when we had under the Edison James administration. But now, there don't seem to be a family. And I like what you said, that we must come together as a family on that. And remember, in my opening comments, I made the point that when you think you are doing an assault on a journalist, you're doing an assault on the citizen, because this journalist is the mouth of the citizen. This man or woman that cannot say what they want to say and express and do not know the story, the journalist is here to tell the story. So thanks again, Jeffrey. You want to make a quick intervention?
Yes, a quick point. Right, a quick point. And what we must all do is maybe analyze what we're going to say, yes, but never, ever you come out with a lie. Come out with the truth. And what I realize that's going on nowadays, that these politicians have people going around the rooms. When you get to ask a question, ask, what are you going to ask? If they tell them, oh, no, you can't ask a question, especially when they're on foreign soil. So what is going on?
And try to convert a false into a truth.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jeffrey. So the next person I'm going to call on, because we hear press freedom, and you hear that word freedom, and you ask yourself, well, is there really a freedom, or is how does that relate to our constitution, or and we heard from Tim, we heard from Jeffrey. So I'm going to ask Justice Andre, who is here with us this evening, to just speak briefly on the whole question of freedom of expression, which includes the press, freedom of the press, and how does that relate to our constitution? Dr. Andre, can you go ahead, please?
Yes, let me indicate my warm thoughts on being invited to be among such an esteemed group of folks, journalists, concerned Dominicans, and so on. The constitutional guarantees of freedom of expression is quite clear. It comes up in Section 1B of the Constitution. It also comes up in Section 10. But when we talk about freedom of expression, the question is this: freedom of expression for whom? A few years ago, we witnessed, and there was no public outcry, when the Prime Minister berated a young female journalist from the Nation station because she had the audacity to ask him a question which, quite frankly, zeroed in on his unseemly wealth. We had a few years ago, with respect to the House of Assembly, the Speaker of the House, now deceased, who banned a journalist called Kali John Baptist, I'll call his name, from reporting or attending at the People's House, the Parliament. But you know something? There was no challenge. There was no challenge to those egregious acts. No journalist should be banned from reporting the proceedings in any House of Assembly. But she was never challenged. We've had occasion, as you know, Mr. Alvin, they ordered journalists who had to flee Dominica because they asked, or they dared to ask questions to the political directorate concerning, for example, the unlawful accumulation of wealth. So the whole question of freedom of expression has to be regarded, or has to be construed with respect to whether or not you ask questions which reflect a support for the government. If you dare to ask or challenge these folk, the sort of retribution will be brought to bear against your head, your journalistic head, so to speak. This is not some revolutionary utterance. It is well known in Dominica among journalists. And this is why you had on March the 19th a senior officer assaulting a journalist. That's exactly what happened. While other journalists stood by, other journalists who were regarded as being friendly to the government. The question is that the democracy that we should be prepared to condone or to countenance? Are we taking up the mantle of challenge when fellow journalists are blatantly assaulted, when their rights are blatantly violated? What recourse do we have in law? And there is recourse. So when we speak about freedom of expression, when we speak about freedom of the media, we have also to talk about the ability to seek legal redress when those rights are violated. And the question is, and this is a challenge to the journalists themselves. Are they, in the appropriate circumstances, prepared to take the challenge of seeking judicial redress when their rights are violated? And that is a question I cannot answer. That is a question directed at the journalists themselves. On March the 19th, it was not just the police who were on trial. It was not just the government who was on trial. It was, quite frankly, the press in Dominica who was also on trial. And it's only they have to show that, quite frankly, they value their freedom, even more so when it is under attack, as it has been for a number of years now. So the journalists have a role to play in preserving their own existence, preserving the integrity of their profession, and preserving the integrity of their own members when they are blatantly and flagrantly attacked in a public forum. I'll stop on that note.
Thank you very much, Justice Andre. As most of you know, Justice Andre is a judge in Dominica and a judge in Canada. And so he's someone that can give you a very good legal perspective of the law, the Constitution, and what we're discussing. As I indicated earlier, we are graced with the presence of a veteran in the media fraternity, if I may put it that way, in the person of Mr. Julian Rogers, a veteran Caribbean broadcaster, a columnist, and media consultant with decades of experience covering regional affairs and a deep commitment to Caribbean unity. And it gives me great pleasure to now invite Mr. Julian Rogers to present to us. Mr. Rogers.
Good evening. Good evening to you in Dominica. And I'm all the way in Belize. So I'm really not a flight away from you. So I miss that connection, the ease of connection to get to my
The invite is still there, man. Anytime.
to get to my beloved Dominica. So I know you invited me on. I didn't get any more of the discussion beyond a couple of minutes ago, but I suspect that. Well, I expect, and I understand why you would invite me on because of the article that I wrote. I want to start off first by making a correction to the piece which appeared on Major Isle. And that is where I made a reference to the courts deciding that the arrest of demonstrators was not on. I know everybody there knows it better than I do, that it was really one person that the court was dealing with at that matter. So I want to clarify that. And I'd asked Major Isle to make sure that they post an update from me as regards that. It is one of those things of following developments at a distance, and there may be some errors from time to time, but I think we in the media need to own up to when an error is made, that we need to clarify that as soon as possible. So let me get that out of the way. I'm watching this at a distance and at the same time feeling very, very close, only because I have been around in the Eastern Caribbean and the Eastern Caribbean media for long enough to remember a number of incidents and circumstances in Dominica. And I think that was the heart of my piece, where as every time that I heard of a disturbance, and I think you know very well that I've always been tracking Dominica developments, unfortunately, a lot to do with hurricanes in recent times and the impact that it's had on the country, and of course the recovery efforts as well. But I was very saddened to see the reports coming out of Dominica and to see the videos and so on. So I was particularly worried, and I'm still worried today because I spoke to one of my fellow journalists in Dominica who said that there were still people being arrested, etc. that situation is not a happy one for anybody in any part of the Caribbean. This is not a Dominica concern. It's for us as a region, and therefore, my expectation is that cool heads will come to the fore, and that somebody somewhere somehow will find a way to settle this situation and to cool things down. Because as journalists, you may say that we don't have a soul or a heart, but that's not true. We feel the same pain that you feel in your country anytime that there's something that is unhappy. So that my piece really was reflecting, because of my knowledge of the history of Dominica, that I could really talk to a generation of people who have not known of the disturbances in previous times, involving previous administrations, etc. And I think as a journalist, I have a responsibility to share the historical with an audience and to give people an understanding and a perspective. So that is where my piece was triggered. I don't know what else you want me to say at this stage, so I'm going to stop right there and ask you to challenge me, question me. I'm just a tool here in the context of things.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers, for your presentation. Appreciate it. As we said, you're one of those persons who have seen it all throughout the region. So, and we know, having yourself worked in Dominica for some time, your heart is there in Dominica.
Yes.
We're indeed pleased that you could join us in that dialogue. So our final presenter I'm going to call on now, after which our producer will play a clip, just kind of taking us down memory lane. Protest is not anything new. We've done it under several administrations since before independence and since after independence. But before we do that, I'll now call on Mr. Anthony Drago. And like I said, most of you may be familiar with Mr. Drago as being the host of this second interview. Mr. Drago, please go ahead, sir.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Thomas. Good evening, fellow presenters and members of the audience. Protocol has been established according to our famous Calypsonian Sour. Protocol has been established. It's a pleasure to be here and on this panel where we're talking about journalism and the role of journalism, and I'll expand it to media. And just because of the way the whole industry has evolved in the last few years, the advent of the internet. And so what is the role of journalism and media? There is several, but most importantly, especially in our small island, record keeping. A lot of folks, when they're writing a book or they're doing their thesis in school and they do their research, a big part of that research is to go back to old newspapers, old television programs, and so on, and that sort of thing. And that way they can recreate events from the past. So if you wanted to go back to see what happened in Dominica in 1979, a big part of that would be the newspapers. So that's a huge part of the work of journalists, because what is current right now becomes recorded and established as part of our history, part of our culture. If journalists gather information, they disseminate information. All of this can be put into one container, which is that journalists have a primary role of informing the public, informing local public, the regional public, the international public about events that are happening, and not just current events, but if the job is done properly, putting it in context. And so that role becomes especially important when we think of journalism. And I say in a democracy, our journalists are an important branch of government. So we would have the executive branch and the government. In our model, we have the opposition, we have the courts of the judiciary, And I think a very important part of that is journalists and the media. And so that is why when Alvin made the presentation, and he said that in what is done when a dictatorship is being established is first to silence the media, because a silent media results in an uninformed public. And the opposite is true. An informed public is a danger to anybody who wants to be a dictator or autocratic ruler. If your media is silent, they cannot carry out their role properly to do the information that is required of the public. And so an uninformed public now becomes a controlled public. And so that part is what you see. So all of the examples that we've heard from the previous presenters, it is attempt to intimidate and by extension to silence our reporters, our journalists, because the intention is to keep the public uninformed. So the idea is to have the journalists power and therefore not be able to bring out the information to the public, to answer the question, to be the voice of the public. That mic that they have is the voice of the public. As Alvin said before, the camera they have is the window that the public has to look into areas that they don't have access to. And so it's extremely important that we are able to inform and increase the awareness of the public of the role of a journalist. And not just the public, we have to also increase the awareness of the journalists of their role. Because we saw with the harassment of the young journalists of MO News, there were two other journalists standing right there within arm's reach, and made reference to, and they totally absolved themselves, divorced themselves from what was happening. And if they understood that what was happening to their sister journalists is it impacts them, they would at least have said, it's okay. Why don't you leave her? She's not doing anything. But instead, they chose to just stand there and ignore it. And so that tells me that in Dominica, at least in those two um, uh, uh, journalists that were very present, they're not fully aware of their role as journalists. And so that is something that forums like this will help to address the awareness. It's not just the public being aware of the important role of journalists, but the journalists themselves being aware of how important a role that they play in our country and in a democracy and so on. So that clarification is very important. The, 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 the issue that we're facing is the independence of, of journalists. How independent are they? How independent can they be? When in our situations in the Caribbean where government is the biggest game in town, everybody works for government, and if they don't work for government directly, the private sector company that they're working for probably gets business from government, and therefore they would feel that they are jeopardizing their ability to continue to do business in government if they support, say, for example, a media house that gives voice to people who are opposing the policies of the government. So if you have a radio station and they look at their bottom line, they're going to say, okay, we cannot give airtime to ERC, even if ERC will pay us, because at the end of the day, the government is going to pull their ads from our radio station. The private sector companies that are advertising with us, if they continue to advertise with us, they might see it as a tacit um, uh, approval of that voice. And so that's the threat that we're facing. Companies are looking at their survival. Companies are looking at where their revenue is coming from. So, and that is a huge challenge to the independence of the media. So, as our esteemed friend Jeffrey from he said is that we have a tool, we have social media, and the internet can be a great equalizer because it has reduced the barrier to entry. Whereas before you had to pay for FM license, you had to get broadcast, you had to get all kind of equipment to be able to get your voice out, whether it's in print or in radio or television. Right now, with a phone and an internet connection, we can get our voices out. But there's a danger with that. Because everybody can do that, it now becomes a challenge for our public to be able to discern what is fake news and what is real news. And how do you digest what you hear? And how many, and of course, the person with the biggest mouth is going to repeat what they say several times. And you know what they say, a lie repeated multiple times starts to look like the truth. And so that is what I have to manage. So the internet can cut both ways. It can be a result that levels the playing field, but it has to be managed. And professional media has to recognize that and be able to chart a path in all of that confusion of too much information, chart a path and make connections between credible media sources so that if we hear something on the internet, we can say, okay, let us go to so and so platform, let us go to TDN, let us go to Dominican News Online, because we know by and large they do background to make sure that what they put out is not rumor, that there is some background support. So as the professional media, the media association has to be able to lay that path down that somebody can come to when there is conflicting news or where there is sensational news that they can use to verify whether a piece of information is credible or not. The other thing that we would want to do as a public is we have to, if we recognize the role of the press, we have to support. So we have to uh, support them, whether it's in small advertising, sometimes simple things that like and views help because this is the lifeblood of our modern day media that people associate number of likes with credibility, with reliability. And so we as a public have to take that initiative and to make sure that we support the media houses that we would like to see thrive um, with that kind of help. The other thing that we can do is uh, just as we see policemen who may not necessarily be following the true personality or character of a good policeman, is because the 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 the, um, the groups and the organizations that would preempt the police force, like Boy Scouts and the different types of uniform groups that young boys would get in, that would start to teach them more way to behave and to follow rules and discipline and so on. Those things are not supported the way they support it. So now you have a young man or a young woman that will grow up and they've never been in a group before and they suddenly go join the police force because they want a job. But somebody like that is very easy to massage or to bend in a different direction, as opposed to someone who became a Boy Scout at 7 years old and was steeped in that sort of tradition of discipline and rules and those type of things. That person is going to have a character that's developed that is much more robust and more difficult to bend in the wrong direction. And similarly, if we want to grow journalists, especially in an environment where anybody with a phone and an internet connection can can act as a journalist, is to start to reintroduce in our schools a school newsletter, for example. Uh, and so somebody who's in high school has the opportunity to be an editor of their school newspaper. They have the experience of going to chase a story and know what it's like to build a story. They understand the information before they publish it. We no longer have that sort of activity in our schools to the extent that we had it. So those are things that we can do. Have debate competitions where folks are taught to challenge ideas that are brought to them in a respectful way. And they're also taught that different people can have different opinions and still be friends and still be respectful and still be cordial. So those are some practical things that we can do. We can go into the schools and we can support the 4-H club and the Boy Scouts and the Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme. We can go into the community and support the Lions Club and the JCs and Rotary Club because associations in all of those types of organizations help to expose our young people and prepare them for when they become a policeman, when they become a journalist, when they become a teacher, when they become a businessman. They have that experience and therefore they have more confidence in the decisions that they make. And so that, excuse me, that is what I put together in terms of how we can look at what's happening in Dominica and what can we do about it. Is to one help increase the awareness of the role and the importance of a free and independent press and media to support them, and three, let's look back at our young people and give them the opportunity to learn the skills, develop the talent, and get the experiences so that when they become policemen and news reporters and leaders, that it's not a Johnny come lately, it's something that has been inculcated in them from the time they were young. And I will say thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to express this few thoughts on such an esteemed platform. And I bid everybody good night. And I hope that Dominica can climb out of this. And permit me to say this, is that we would like to see more regional engagement. So what happens with the Caribbean Association of Journalists? What happens to other journalists in St. Lucia and St. Vincent and Grenada? What happens to policemen in Antigua who can come out and say, listen, what is happening in Dominica? That's not policing, but this is how we would do it. It should be done. And we in the diaspora, because we are not so much under the control of the powers that be, we have a special role to play in helping to make sure that our brothers and sisters on the ground can survive this difficult time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. Thank you very much for that well presented presentation on the part. And excuse me, I liked the note that you end on, calling on us in the diaspora, Dominicans in the diaspora, and the role that CARICOM should play in all of this. What we will do now, the producer is just going to play a short insert. I truly hope it is short, Mr. Producer. And then from there, we will open it up and take some questions or, questions or clarifications that you have. And then from there, we will then look at, based on what each of the presenters have said, where do we go from there in terms of the ERC's role and what are some of the unfinished business, put it this way, that we need to address. Because some persons might be saying, well, the law is passed, why are you guys still there flogging a dead horse? What is there left to talk about? I'll say to you, there's a lot still left to talk about from the ERC standpoint. And that is why a free press must be allowed to express and articulate the things that are still left undone, that needs to be done, that are urgent. So, Mr. Producer, go ahead with your insert.
We have to understand that in the activities leading up to the 29th of May, that the government of the day, perceiving a mood in the country opposed to the pieces of legislation that were being proposed for Parliament, mobilized its security forces. 179 members of the defense force were mobilized, and they were brought to the Botanic Gardens every day to practice how they would disperse crowds, shoot and kill persons who have been identified to be eliminated, and otherwise to create a reign of terror in the land. And the Union perceived this and mobilized their forces and sought as well to inform all of the people of the country of the dangers that face this country. And on the 28th of May, it was resolved that the people of Dominica would assemble outside government headquarters to demonstrate their disapproval of the action proposed by the government of the day. Those of you who were there will recall that people were asked, they were implored. You remember Zaboka on the 28th of May, myself and others, imploring the people, please, on the 29th tomorrow, when you go to government headquarters, no sticks, no stones, no bottles, no knives, nothing at all that could look like a weapon, because there were police and defense force out there, and no provocation. The only weapon that people were advised that they should have was a handkerchief or a bath towel soaked in water to protect their eyes and their nostrils from the tear gas which they expected would follow. And therefore the people who assembled outside government headquarters on the 29th of May 1979 were unarmed, peaceful citizens of this country, exercising their democratic right to assemble and to protest in defense of the Constitution and the freedoms guaranteed in the Constitution. And you will recall, brothers and sisters, that after people have been there for 2 hours, and the police have been there for 2 hours, and there have been no incidents, there have been no stones being thrown, there have been no injury, no riot. The defense force came up Kennedy Avenue. You will remember, and from a distance of some 200 yards, they opened fire and began to send tear gas at the people of Kennedy Avenue. You will recall seeing policemen in uniform dashing for cover, because the defense force was not acting in collaboration and in coordination with the police. The police were being tear gassed like everybody else, because it was a day when the defense force was let loose on the people of Dominica.
So, here you are it, folks. History can be a brutal thing. Sometimes if you don't know your history, you're likely to repeat the mistakes of the past. And sometimes it's just good that we go back. And that is the role of the press, to go back in history and make that contrast and ask the hard questions. What is different now that was different in 79 years? The right to assemble and the right to protest as a citizen. And I will pause there, and if anyone has any question they want to ask, or I see team hands up already. If any of the panelists wants to expound on what their fellow panelists have said, I will go ahead and take that. try to be as brief and concise because I know, though we don't have that many persons here, but I'm sure there are several persons that we want to make a contribution, or as I say, the panelists to come back and to expand on either what they said earlier or what the fellow panelists may have said. So, Tim, Mr. Dura, I recommend you, sir, you're doing the opening batsman again, boy. You seem to have batted pretty well in the first inning.
Well, you seem to have prepared me, Alvin, you know?
Thank you. I'm glad I was able to do
that
that.
position, which I'm gladly embracing.
Yeah.
But I wanted to add to what Anthony and earlier on Jeffrey Tavares, have suggested, and that is there's a need for the banding together of the media in Dominica, for coming together, for the strengthening, of the media presence on the island, and also in terms of the creating a oneness and a sense of purpose in terms of how we would like to exercise our role. But I want to point out that one of the biggest challenges we have in this regard is that the political polarization that has gripped the country for a number of years now, we know that there's a serious political divide in this country. This too has affected the media in Dominica. And so you find that there are those of us who are still striving to do our jobs impartially, and without fear or favor. And it's difficult. We all know the constraints. But there are others too who have taken a position, taken one side or the other. And it makes it difficult to unify the media body in Dominica and to be able to develop this sense of oneness and this sense of purpose. And so this is something, because at this point in time, there's no no functioning media organization in this country or association. There was one, but it petered out, and I think it has been replaced by a WhatsApp chat. But a WhatsApp chat essentially does what social media does, chat. And so I think we need to begin to look at this very seriously if we are to really get to the point where we can begin to address the issues that affect us as one body with strength and a sense of purpose. We need to begin to look at that. One of the problems is the young people who are replacing, those of us who are moving out. They have only known one system of government. They've not really been exposed to other experiences. And so it is difficult to produce good, responsible, independent journalists from a group of young people who have known just one way of political life in this country. And so we need to begin and as you spoke about our history, Alvin, and the need for us to be mindful of our history and to ensure that we, proliferate that history. And I think we need to begin with our young people. We need the State College has a journalism program, but I'm not so sure how effective it is. And this is something that needs to be strengthened. This is something that we need to encourage so that we can begin to produce a new cadre of young professional journalists who will be able to tackle the job, independently. And I think this is one of the directions that we need to take in this country. Otherwise, when those that are left of the old guard move on, we're not going to have any journalists of credence to replace them.
Yeah. No, I think that is quite a good intervention that you've made, Tim. Earlier, like I said, I referred to a book by Maria Ressa, Ressa, and she was a journalist in Philippines during that dictatorship time. And the title of the book, How to Stand Up to a Dictator, The Fight for Our Future. She was also a Nobel Prize winner. And I'll strongly recommend any one of our young journalists on this um, um, forum tonight. I saw, as I said earlier, I recognize Miss Benjamin. You really need to get a copy of those books and read it. But this is one of the things journalists need to do, and constantly reading and informing and educating themselves. And if you read that book, it will provide some motivation. I'm not saying that I'm telling you to be a Maria Rissa, but I think if you read it, you will see how she stood up at the time, as Tim was saying, against the odds. But thanks, Tim, for that intervention. I see Julian Rogers, our veteran, there wants to come in. Go ahead, Julian.
I hate when people say I'm a veteran.
Well, you got to give respect where it's due, you know. I mean, you know.
I feel like a wounded soldier. I may very well have earned that. I was very interested to hear the contribution from Anthony and of course from my good friend, longtime friend Tim. I'm sitting here and I'm listening to you all, and I'm just worried that what you are saying, Tim, particularly, is taking me back to Radio Antilles days, which immediately sets me off worrying, because if it is that the Dominica media landscape is very similar to those days where you did not have a so-called cadre of independent media operators, then you have a very serious problem. And unfortunately, it is a situation repeated in too many other Caribbean countries. And therefore, I think that the solutions, for instance, that you put on both Tim and Anthony put on the table are more long-term solutions, which we had hoped would have been in place a long time ago, and that the environment that has been enriched by the facilities of online platforms and so on would have broken the back of that stranglehold, so to speak, on the media in a country such as Dominica. It's not a happy story, really. And for somebody like me, for instance, now to come in from the outside and to be seen to be covering developments in Dominica, really is not necessarily a great thing. It's almost like CNN coming to tell you a story kind of thing. I mean, with as much respect that you have for me, my intervention really is one of attempting to share the story of Dominica with the rest of the Caribbean, because I think that is my responsibility as a journalist. But at the same time, the people of Dominica who are operating as journalists must be also telling the story and be free to tell that story without let or hindrance. And what I'm picking up here is that there is not let and hindrance in some quarters, or that some people are hamstrung, or that the strictures and structures denying them from participating in the process of as a good journalist, it is not there. And that is not happy. You talk about the importance of having other journalists across the Caribbean respond to to your crisis, because that is really what you're talking about in the Dominica situation. I can tell you, for instance, that the Association of Caribbean Media Workers made very strong efforts to ensure that you had a functioning media association in Dominica. And I remember we were assembled in Barbados. I'm trying to remember now how far back it was, but we literally had a representation of two associations of media groups from Dominica. And we had urged them to get together and form one unit, because we recognize the danger, which you pointed to, of the political forces, whether it was politics, or it was just personality politics coming to play in this context. Because if you do not have a representative body, then you have a challenge of the media being picked on by individual personalities. Um, and you really need to be in a position where, look, if you have to deal with the police, there has to be there has to be some organization outside of the owners and operators of media entities in Dominica who can sit down with the commissioner of police or the hierarchy of the police, as the case may be, and say, look, this is how we expect that we will respect you and you'll respect us. We have a responsibility to tell the story, whether you're rioting or whether you're demonstrating or whatever the case may be. The journalist has a responsibility to report exactly what development is and should not be hindered in carrying out that function. Unless, as a human being, you really challenge the police on the ground or behave stupid or whatever the case may be. But you cannot and should not have a situation where the respect is not there for the journalist operating in telling the story, and whether the story is good, bad, or indifferent. I mean, we look at the international coverage of journalists in war zones, etc. Yes, they get killed in Gaza and whatever else. But we in the Caribbean are supposed to be a zone of peace. Therefore, I don't expect that a journalist operating in Dominica is going to be in danger or be hindered in carrying out the function, as the case may be. It suggests to me that that if that is the case, then there's a lack of respect for the journalist and the journalist's role in telling the story, in reporting the developments in the country. We have to. We can't be expected to carry out our function and be concerned. Well, we are concerned about our safety, personal safety, as the case may be. But we have to tell the story. I know some of the stories are not good, but that is our commitment. That is the sacrifice. Because I mean, you know, Tim will tell you, journalists don't get rich. We're only rich in terms of our commitment to carry on a function that we consider is crucial for the democracy of our countries. That's what we do. That really is it, right? And that really is the heart of for instance, where I pointed out that I made an error. I want to address that error right away and let people know, look, I didn't get it right, and I'm fixing it. And that is my responsibility. And therefore, I think that what I'm hearing and what is worrying me is that there is an environment that really and truly has not changed in what, 30, 40 years, Tim? Maybe longer than that. And that is not encouraging. You cannot have Tim saying that, and on the other side, and Anthony on the other side saying, well, we need to train young journalists, blah, blah, blah. We're going to train young journalists to operate in this environment. That doesn't make any, that is not attractive. I'm sorry. No young person is going to be a Matt Peltier, and so on. They will not take up this particular role and function and see it as their duty if it is that they are hindered in carrying out what they've been told by their editors, who says to them, look, we want you to go and cover the protest that is being staged by opposition forces or whatever forces in Roseau. The journalist is not going to feel that they must risk their life and limb and livelihood, which is very important here, to be able to cover a story if it is that they are not respected in carrying out that function. And that respect must come from everybody, whether it's opposition, whether it's government, whether it's the private sector, whether it's non-governmental organizations, the case may be. You have to come to a level of respect for the journalist's role in all of this. Journalists, the people who have started newspapers over the years, etc., one-man operations and so on, they didn't set out to become rich doing this. And while I'm talking about the rich, when Anthony talked about the whole financial complex in this matter, look, the economics of operating media in the Caribbean has been totally upside down because nobody's making any money. So therefore, if people graduate from State College in Roseau tomorrow, and you ask them what field do they want to go into, or they'll say, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a doctor, I want to be this, I want to be the next thing. Very few of them are going to say that they want to be journalists. Why? Because they do not think that this is a role that is respected, first of all. Secondly, they will be told, like I told some people, you're not going to get rich, right? There's not a lot of money in this, as the case may be. And they're fully aware that the economics of business, period, not just media business, the economics of business is not such that it supports the maintenance and sustenance of media operations. And we have to face the facts of the time. And really, people like Jim and many others who have sojourned for a long time in this industry will tell you again and again of their particular experiences where their commitment has not brought them riches or whatever, but the only richness is in the experience and in the continued commitment. I think people must respect that. I don't, and that respect has to come. I'm not pointing at the government now. I'm pointing at everybody, government, opposition, business leaders, as the case may be. Because I will say one last thing. If you do not have a proper functioning media, which covers the developments, gives all the sides of the story, as the case may be, and gives people, most importantly, a voice, there will be more riots in your streets, because you will not have, people will not feel that they can they can say exactly how they feel about developments in their country if the people who are reporting what they're saying are threatened and hindered from doing their job. That is really the heart of all of this. I think I'll stop there, because I just want, when I was invited to this session, somebody said to me, "Boy, you're going into this, blah 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 blah." Look, I am old enough to take my lips from wherever it comes from. I've done that, but I think that if I sit here in Belize and I hear that Dominique is hurting, I am hurting. And this is not just as a journalist now. This is a human being, because this is a country that's looked after me when I faced crisis in operating radio and television years ago, as the case may be. It was a place that I turned to for solace. It's the third place I turned to for support, as the case may be. It's a place where I know that I have built a reputation as an honest broker in this industry. And I'm saying to everybody involved, Dominica does not need this crisis.
Yeah, thank you, Julian. Thank you very much. I can see the passion they're running in you, man. And I know exactly how you feel and where it's coming from. And I really, really appreciate that intervention. Tim, you might want to put down your hand. I see it's still up. But you made a very fundamental comment here, which is a function that is the journalist, a function that is crucial to our democracy. And that is what we're seeing, guys. If we do not get a handle on this, our democracy is being undermined. Don't take my words. Take the words of the four authors that I referred to. Timothy Snyder in Tyranny and the two other authors. We are slipping into an area of dictatorship, and our democracy is going to be affected. And what is more, as I said earlier, this is a young journalist, a woman at that, a young woman journalist that was being manhandled, assaulted by a police officer who is now the deputy chief of police. Think of that for a minute. Just kind of marinate your minds on that. This individual is now the deputy commissioner of police, and he conducted himself in a manner that no one has raised any question about. The media fraternity, there's one in Dominica that's not raising anything. And this is the gentleman who may tomorrow, today or tomorrow, is going to sign off the permission for protest or meeting or assembly, whatever it is. And he was on full display while we trip with a journalist. So I'm saying all of this to say, and I understand how Julian feel about it. And hopefully, our hope is that coming out of that dialogue that we're having, that those of us in the media and Dominica and outside of Dominica can, as we say, join hands together and see how we can address this crisis. It is a crisis. How we are to address this crisis that we have. I see Queen Esther want to make the comment. Go ahead, Queen Esther. Queen Esther, unmute. You're muted. Yeah.
Yes, good evening, good evening. Queen Esther is Rosie Felix, the one and the same.
Okay.
Yes. Good night, everyone. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
I want to commend and applaud, salute all the journalists on this platform tonight. But I want to single out Miss Benjamin of Imo News. I was at the protest where she was abused by the police officer, the senior police officer. I didn't witness it live, but of course the cameras don't lie. And I was appalled to see how the police officer treated a woman, a media personnel. Miss Benjamin was quite brave. She did not give up. Miss Benjamin, we spoke after the fact, and she was just brave, and I feel she has far to go. She has far to go. But the interesting thing, and well, not interesting and not surprising, I have this movement, Rosa Sparks, after Rosa Parks, some of you may know. And I formulated a press statement. Now, usually as press, you ask for a voice clip. So I did not send in the text. I just did an audio recording. And I sent it to one radio station in particular. Before I put it online or anywhere, I sent it to one radio station, and that was DBS. And I sent it deliberately, just to see if they would, air it. Of course, it went nowhere. I let a couple days pass, and then I put it on Rosie Sparks' page. I think I sent it to DNO, and I think to one other media house. But it is very disturbing. If we muzzle the press, when we begin muzzling the press, we know where we are going. We are heading down a precipice. This is very bad news for Dominica. It's very bad news for the region. Mr. Thomas, you asked a question going forward, what next? I want to recommend that the media people in Dominica begin to regroup and revive the media association, or form a new one, whatever it takes. Regroup. Also, I every day of the year is awareness for something. May 3rd, less than a month away, is International Press Freedom Day.
That's right.
So take notes. May 3rd, Saturday, May 3rd. So media houses in Dominica, media personnel, the region, we should do one big something and highlight that abuse of this woman in Dominica. And so we're not going to let it die. We're not going to let it die. The media people have a responsibility to keep it, there on the front burner. Of course, you mentioned that. We've seen the gentleman has been rewarded, which we all know that was what he was. That performance was for reward, which he has gotten. But it must not die, because if a police officer violates a media personnel and goes unpunished, that is the end of it all. So that's my contribution tonight, and I thank all of you media people for bringing the news to us when it's good and when it's bad. Bring it out once it's the truth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosie. Thank you, Rosie Felix, and thank you for the work that you've been doing on behalf of the women in Dominica. You could raise your hand, put your hand down, and sit still up so I can know that you're done. Thank you. Anyone else want to chime in? I think I recognize. I think I saw one or two other media persons there. If you want to chime in, now is the time to do that. Justice Andre is still with us. Any comments you want to make based on what you've heard so far and what is developing on the ground?
Well, what I can say in summary is that there is a growing realization is that democracy is not a spectator sport. There's a growing realization that the rights that are enshrined in the Constitution are not there as window dressing. There's a growing realization that persons, to ensure that their rights are preserved, have to take the adequate steps to ensure that they are preserved. So that it is incumbent on every citizen of the island, every person who bears witness to a blatant transgression, a blatant violation, an egregious act which basically diminishes the Constitution. That the hope is that Dominicans as a whole realize that they have a role to play in preserving the Constitution. You use it or you lose it. That's the bottom line. If you don't act, if you don't show any type of revulsion when these things happen, quite frankly, that is the beginning of the end of democracy as we know it. And it is incumbent upon us in 2025 to ensure that we continue to breathe life and we continue to recognize that the Constitution is a living document. It is one which basically defines who we are, what we are, and what actions we should countenance or should not countenance. This is not a police state. Irrespective of what the police officers think, irrespective of whether they think that somehow persons have to come to them and bend the knee for permission to exercise their democratic rights, they are obviously fundamentally wrong. But if we do nothing, then we legitimize the evisceration of our Constitution, and we shouldn't tolerate that in any way, in any form, or by anyone. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Justice Andre. I just want to recognize DNO and Push Past 10 as well as TBN Network that are carrying that event live on their various platforms. So thank you to DNO, thank you Push Past 10, and thank you TBN Network. There are folks listening to this event live as it's currently being presented. Anyone else want to chime in? Do I see a hand, or is anyone else? Anyone of the so here's what I'm going to do. Before I just ask each of the panelists to just give a 1 minute, 2 minute closing comment, I just want to make two brief observations. And that is, folks been asking, well, the law has been passed. Why are you guys still talking about this thing? Let me say, though, that the work of the PRC is incomplete. And what I mean by incomplete, there are two major fundamental aspects of the law that remain undermined. The first one has to do with the electors list. If anyone is not contributing, just mute your mic, please. The electors list. And as you may have heard, the government chose to do reconfirmation instead of re-registration. In the CCJ report of July of 2022, the CCJ opined that the electors list is the central element of an election. And let me just correlate that to the situation in Guyana. Just under a month ago, March 10th in Guyana, there was an article published in Wired JA, Guyana. And that article spoke about the bloated electoral list undermines democracy. CARICOM, OAS, and the Commonwealth must act. That was the headline story. Again, the journalists reporting the story. And it says there, evidence from the 2020 election has proven that such irregularities can severely undermine democracy. And it went on further to say that CARICOM failure to uphold democratic, and that comment was coming from Ralph Gonzalez of St. Vincent. CARICOM failure to uphold democratic principles in Guyana reflects a broader failure in regional integration. And it further went on to say, however, instead of ensuring implementation, because they had a CARICOM task force to look into that, CARICOM has remained silent. Many of the leaders and individuals in the region who were very vocal in 2020 in defense of democracy have since disappeared from the conversation. Now, in the case of Guyana, Guyana has a population of about 800,000 persons. Their registered voters list is 731,000, which represents about 91% of the population. Dominica has a registered, a population of just shy of 70. I'm not even sure if it's anywhere close to 70. Maybe it's in the upper 60s, 60-something thousand. However, they have a registered voters list of 74,484 there, about almost 75,000 on the voters list. Well above 100% of the population. And as I just indicated to you, the option that the government chose to do is to go a reconfirmation. Time does not permit for us to go into the difference here tonight, except to say, though, that in concluding this article by Wired JA, the article concluded by saying, CARICOM's silence in the face of electoral corruption. They refer to the bloated list that is 91% of the population in the face of electoral corruption is a betrayal of its role and as a regional body entrusted with safeguarding democracy. If Guyana's bloated voters list is not addressed, it will set a dangerous precedent for future elections. Regional and international bodies must act now. Failure to do so will render CARICOM, the OAS, and the Commonwealth irrelevant as impartial defenders of democracy. Unquote. Why am I saying all of this? I'm saying all of this to say the work of the ERC is not completed. Because while you may say a bill has been passed, the current bill and the reconfirmation exercise that has to be undertaken has a time frame of 15 months. If, however, an election is called before that 15-month period is up, the government will use the corrupted, inflated voters list of almost 75,000 to conduct elections. The corrupt list. And herein lies the work of the media and the journalists to present the facts, to present the information, so the citizens can make an informed position. Let's look at one other area very quickly, which has to do with campaign financing. That too is an area of contentious, which the government has refused to incorporate in the new legislation. And I'm referring you now to a document prepared by Mr. Julian N. Johnson. And that document is dated March the 15th, 2025, less than a month ago. And Mr. Julian Johnson, for those of us who may not be familiar, is a barrister at law and a solicitor, and a mediator of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court and Notary Public. He was also the chairman of the IPO, the Integrity Public Commission, and was once the secretary to the cabinet for several years. Very senior and experienced public officer. Here, let me refer to you briefly on the matter of campaign financing that was reflected quite adequately in that document. The Dominica Labour Party budget outline for campaign 2018-2019, dated 1st June 2018, the budget outline circulated on the internet a total budget of $26.64 million. That is 71.92 million EC dollars. He went on to say in the document, it is not wholly immaterial to note that the budget outline included the sum of $2.1 million, which is equivalent to $5.67 million for mobilization of air transport for approximately 1,000 overseas voters, whose participation is vital to our success from some countries as the USA, Canada, Great Britain, US, and British Virgin Islands, Cuba, Venezuela, Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, and the Eastern Caribbean Islands on board. Campaign financing. And that was a provision that Sir Byron presented in draft legislation, which the government rejected. The Prime Minister, you may have heard, quoted several reasons why campaign financing is not possible. But let me just refer to briefly for you. It shouldn't take that long. And I would strongly recommend to persons in the media obtain a copy of that document from Mr. Julian Johnson. It's online, it's available. I think the media need to obtain that document and review the document and the arguments made in there for campaign financing. Under Part 4 of the legislation that Sir Byron presented to the government, which is rejected, political campaign financing, Section 54 to 75 of the House of Assembly Elections Bill 2023. That was what Sir Byron presented. 1. Contributions, that is, gifts of money or gifts in kind given to a political party or an independent candidate, and impermissible contributors, so that need to be disclosed. Election expenses, limits on campaign expenditure, general provision related to campaign financing. 3. Other financial provisions, political parties to keep financial records in connection with campaign financing, and the duty to submit annual returns to the Commission. And 4, Commission duty to maintain records of report, and the Commission power to make regulation relating to Part 5 provision. All of those were presented to the government in the form of draft legislations. It is worthy to emphasize that Sir Dennis Byron, in the Phase 2 report on electoral reform, Commonwealth of Dominica, June 2023, informed that Commonwealth Caribbean electoral legislation, notably those of Jamaica and Barbados, have useful models, especially the Jamaica Representation of the People's Amendment Act 2016, being reference source for the proposal relating to campaign contribution and campaign expenditure. So there are models out there that you can use. Even the Prime Minister said that, oh, this thing can come in later, this is going to hold back the legislation. But Sir Byron presented draft. So Dennis Byron also explained that the regulation of political and campaign financing is not new to the Commonwealth Caribbean. He pointed out that elements of such regulation can be found in the Act of Parliament of some countries in the region, although only Jamaica has enacted a comprehensive regulatory framework. He asked, campaign financing has been on its agenda as part of the anti-corruption architecture and to minimize conflict of interest by those holding political office since about 1998, with the establishment of the Association of Caribbean Elections Organization. He further stated, in Dominica, The issue of election campaign financing has been on the political agenda, for more than half a century. In recent times, at the end of each election, the observers, that is the OAS observers, the Commonwealth observers, have included recommendation for the regulation of campaign financing. For example, in address to the nation on the 7th day of February 2000, Prime Minister Roosevelt Douglas of the DLP-DFP coalition government expressed his grave concern on the funding of political parties in Dominica and the absence of effective rules governing what and how much money political parties can spend on elections for parliament and how political parties are funded. He was firm and adamant when he said, quote, "We need robust control over election spending to ensure that political parties are properly accountable to the people of Dominica to prevent conflict of interest and the exercise of improper influence. The DLP-DFP coalition is committed to cleaning up Dominica's politics and to ensure the way political parties are funded becomes open and transparent." Unquote. Those were the words of the then Prime Minister, Roosevelt Douglas. Again, in his contribution to the debate on the Bill for Integrity in Public Office Act in 2003, Senator Norris Prevost raised the need to address the funding of political parties and to come up with some clear and transparent rule about the finance of political parties. Answered of the House of Assembly 28 to 30th of April 2003 refers, page 256. Sir Dennis Byron was quite aware that the provision of political finance regulation for Dominica would be disruptive to existing order, which is inevitable in any reform exercise and is unavoidable if the electorate system in Dominica is to be modernized and conform to international best practice. So you see why the work of the ERC is unfinished? The democratic system of good governance, fairness, equity, transparency, and accountability are all principles that underpin the proposal in this legislation. He also noted that the political discord and acrimonious commentary on the financing of political parties and election campaigns issue were part of the tumultuous background which led to the reform consultancy. He, however, emphasized that the principle which underpins the House of Assembly Election Bill 2023 were objective, universal, and adapted to the Commonwealth of Dominica. Every effort has been made to tailor the proposal to reflect perspective of best practices in the context of our Caribbean value, unquote. I'm saying all of this so the media can take this story and challenge the Prime Minister when he brings his frivolous excuses why campaign finances should not be included in the legislation. In her introduction to a Commonwealth publication entitled Political Finance Regulation, a Best Practice Guide to Commonwealth Legislative Approaches, the Right Honorable Patricia Scotland, KC, emphasized the right of individuals to participate in democratic processes, in particular through free and fair elections, in shaping the society in which they live. The citizens had a right to protest. They had a right to say that whatever is in this legislation is not satisfactory and should not have been intimidated. She added, quote, "A truly democratic system demands political equality, which unfortunately often eludes us. While there are many factors that contribute to political inequalities, such as discrimination and exclusionary politics, none is as notorious as the negative impact of unregulated finance on politics and governance. It is one of the biggest hindrances to credible, transparent, and inclusive democratic processes, and Commonwealth members countries are no exception." The Right Honorable Patricia Scotland Casey further stated that the late Kofi Annan, global giant and son of the Commonwealth, once wrote, quote, across the world, uncontrolled political finance threaten to hollow out democracy and rob it of its unique strength. I hope this guy will help government, regulators, and political parties to develop the necessary legislation for more equitable political financing. I have gone at pains to read through this for you so that you understand what is at stake. And herein lies the role of the media and journalists to report the truth. On a recent broadcast, I heard the Prime Minister with a journalist from Grenada on the narrative. When the question was asked, do you import voters to Dominica? The Prime Minister acknowledged and confessed yes. And he went on to justify that by saying that the UNLP has done it and the Freedom Party has done it as well. I want Dr. Andre to just briefly talk to the question in terms of bribery and treating, which is a provision from my understanding that is not included in the legislation, and whether the fact that the political party can raise 5.67 million EC dollars and import 1,000 persons to come in and vote and skew the democratic process, whether that is considered bribing or tricking, or whether it's okay to do it. Mr. Andre.
It's a criminal offense, period. It's a criminal offense under the Hillsbury's laws of England, which is almost a criminal Bible to many practitioners in the Eastern Caribbean. It says explicitly in that source that the transportation or paying the transportation of voters to come to your country or covering the cost of transportation with the express or implied promise that in exchange for such payment, these voters are going to vote for you or your political entity, or even to refrain from voting, is a criminal offense. Paying for musicians all over, whether it's Gramps Morgan or some religious group or organization, to come to your country during election time for specifically that purpose, to the extent that they're even wearing the colors and signs of a political organization, that constitutes the offense of treating. But for obvious reasons, that will not be expressly indicated in any electoral reform, because the political directorate wants to continue doing what they've been doing over the last 15, 20 years with total impunity. And therein lies the problem. Therein lies the problem. And just to repeat the incestuousness of having people coming to vote, people who live abroad, people who've been abroad for 10 years, for 15, 20, 25, 30 years. Because the electoral laws prior to March 19 provides that, or provided that, you have to be resident in a constituency, or ordinarily resident in a constituency for 6 months before the election to make you eligible to vote. But here is the odiousness of that practice of transporting voters, which is a criminal offense. They are being transported to Dominica to vote in a particular constituency, where the opposition has a strong hand. So they're doing so to tilt the balance in their favor. Voting tourism to skew the results of the election. And if you have an unlimited source of money to do precisely that by virtue of the net proceeds of the sale of Dominican passports, then you don't have to have a legal mind to understand that the elections are not fair and that you are basically giving the political directorate a perpetual advantage insofar as free and fair elections are concerned. This is a recipe for dictatorship. This is just one more comment. This is a recipe for changing a democracy into a papadocracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Andrew. That explains it. So, for those who are listening, and as I say, this is being streamed via DNO,
At the time,
Pushpasken, and TDM Network. The message is loud and clear. We're just going to play a short clip, and then we're going to come back and just have the panelists just give a 1 minute closing, and then we'll bring this matter to a close.
Dan, he was media practitioner and he was the host for Good Morning Dominica. And young Roosevelt Scarrett, at 27 years old, had this to say about campaign financing.
Before the campaign and the issue of resources came to your mind, did you begin to think that we must start doing something differently about campaign financing in Dominica?
So certainly, I think let us try to level the playing field so that everybody can have a fair chance to make a contribution to the country. And I'm hoping that maybe we could have some changes and do it like America, where maybe, I don't know whether for America, the government gives you a certain amount of money to run a campaign. Because at the end of the day, you're representing the country. You understand? And I think there should be some kind of reform as to how we raise money for the campaign and how monies are allocated. That will help tremendously, I think, leveling the playing field.
Leveling the playing field. Before you chime in, because I know you're raring to go, before you chime in on that, we want to fast forward to March 17, again, just 2 days before this protest action. The Prime Minister, in a press conference, had an evolved opinion. Let's listen.
Campaign financing was never on the agenda for electoral reform until Sir Dennis Byron proposed a draft bill that came straight from Jamaica. And even when you read the bill, that bill requires a comprehensive overhaul. It requires a consultation by itself. You understand what I'm saying? And countries where they have it, and only I believe only Barbados and Jamaica where there's some legislation on campaign financing. No other Caribbean country has it, because these things are very complex and very technical in nature, and requires a particular structure in place if you to properly oversee and manage this. So as we've said, and I've expressed that on behalf of the government, that from a principal standpoint and from an aspirational standpoint, yes, campaign financing will be required. And this is why I raised it at the CARICOM meeting once, and the CARICOM was of the view that it may be better for us to look at this thing jointly, and to engage ourselves jointly on this issue of campaign financing, and maybe have a common legislation across our jurisdictions, because it's a very complex of people who are not politicians, people who.
All right, gentlemen and ladies, you heard it. Again, that's where you come to what is truth, what is facts, and the role that the media has to play in all of this. But we're going to bring this to a close. We want to thank all of you who are still here with us. That indicates a strong interest in the conversation. So I'm going to start with Anthony Drago to give a 1 minute closing comment in terms of all what's been said so far. And where do we go from there? 1 minute brief, and then I will move on to the other panelists. Mr. Drago.
All right, thank you, Alvin. Thank you, everybody who contributed so generously of their time. Mr. Julian Rogers as well. Thank you. What I would say quickly is that accountability is the key word. And what journalists, the job that we do in terms of politicians, is to give the public the information that they need to be able to hold politicians accountable. And so when journalists are silenced or intimidated or brutalized, they cannot inform the public the way they should. And as a result of that, the powers that be can get away with stuff that they would not normally be able to get away with, because the ability of the public, the ability of institutions to hold them accountable is greatly compromised. So good night, everyone, and thank you again for having me part of this discussion.
Thank you, Tony. Jeffrey, are you still with us?
Yes, sir. I'm right here.
Yeah, give us your closing 1 minute closing comment, please.
Well, all of us across the length and breadth of the Caribbean, my take on CARICOM is this: if CARICOM couldn't help to solve Haiti's problem, don't depend on CARICOM to help to solve Dominica's problem. Because all the leaders of CARICOM seem as if now not apologize that they're a part of a political club. That is why they won't say anything about what is going on in Dominica. It's for all of us here on this platform, young, old, beautiful and not so beautiful, ugly and not so ugly, to come together and stand up for the people that we love. Politicians don't love the people of the Caribbean. They profess that they love poor people like in Jamaica. They profess that they love the Jamaican people. And look what they're doing now. They're not doing anything for us. The same within the Caribbean. It's for us. It leaves to us, the people, us, the journalists. As I said before, if they don't want us on mainstream media, then take to social media. Take to the Neck Talk program on YouTube. Take to other programs. You all are welcome to come on my program anytime. I'll accommodate you guys. But we must stand up for the democracy of our various countries. As I said before, the soul of the democracy of Jamaica relies on the Jamaican people. And I'll go further tonight. The soul of the democracy of the Caribbean people relies on the Caribbean people. You don't rely on a politician from Dominica or a politician from Barbados or whatever. It relies on us, the people, we the people. We the people must stand up. We the people must demand accountability. And we the people must not be afraid of these people. As I said before in many occasions, we have Nanny of the Maroon who fought for the people of our country, Jamaica and the Caribbean. Marcus Garvey, Sam Sharp, Norman Manley, and all of them. Eugenia Charles of Dominica, the Iron Lady. Stand up for what we believe in this Caribbean. Because if we do not do so, do not think that those who are in Caribbean will. As I said before, if they couldn't solve Haiti's problem, you think you're going to solve Dominica's problem? Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you for those closing comments. And I'll now call on to Tim. Tim, you want to make your closing?
Thank you, Alvin, and thank you to all of the participants in this evening's discussion. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this. It's been a very sobering and, in many cases, thought-provoking, discussion tonight. And it has, established, I think, quite clearly that the media has a tremendous task ahead of it. In Dominica, a tremendous challenge to re-establish in Dominica, I'm talking in particular, and retain its position as the voice of the people and one of the pillars of our democracy, to ensure that we retain and preserve our democracy. And so I am hoping that out of this, this can spark something among us who are here this evening. We've already gotten, a lot of solidarity indications, if you will, from our colleagues, from around the region, Julian Rogers and Anthony and our Jamaican friend Jeffrey. And so we are heartened by this, but I think something needs to come out of this. I think we need to grab this opportunity to begin some sort of movement, some sort of drive to reestablish and I say reestablish because at one point the media did was at a certain point in the history of this country respected, and recognized. And I think we need to get back to that stage. We need to begin the process. But I also want to point out that from the history, my involvement in the media has indicated to me that no government has been open to um, to criticism, so to speak. No government is receptive to criticism, and therefore all the media throughout the history of Dominica has faced that situation. It has deteriorated, I have to say, to a point now where our democracy is threatened. But this has always been the case, that the media has had to fight for its place to be able to um, disseminate information that is not acceptable, or that is not complementary to the government of the day. And we need to bear this in mind. I also want to point out that for those of you, like organizations like the ERC, who have recognized that cause because of what you do, understanding with the media right now, you too have to recognize that the media, in being able or in its efforts to maintain its role and to preserve its role, may not always be an avenue for all of the information that you want to put out, just the information that you're prepared to put out as an organization. Because many organizations do that. All of us do that. We prefer the good press. And so therefore, if we're championing a cause, we would like to see the information that we want to get out there, be disseminated. But sometimes the media may have to challenge you as well, based on whatever information that they put out that needs clarification or needs questioning, and you need to be receptive to that, so that mindset of accepting the media, respecting the media, and understanding the role of the media begins there and proliferates to the country. Because that's where we have to get to a point where we as a nation can understand and accept the role of the media, and understand that the media has a tremendous role to play in the preservation of our democracy. Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Tim. Thank you very much for those closing comments. And I concur fully with what you have just said. Again, I just want to recognize the various platforms, and there's one radio station that is carrying this event live. We have DNO, we have Push Past 10, and we also have TDN Network, and also Q95, as I understand it, is also carrying this matter live. So again, thank you to the various platforms for carrying. Oh yes, also make we talk. Jeffrey Tavares is also carrying it live on his platform. Absolutely, he's not just a panelist, but he's carrying it live. So he's a Jamaican based in Florida, and he has a very wide reach as well. So again, thank you to DNO, Push Past 10, TDN Network, Q95 Radio, and Make We Talk, Jeffrey Tavares talk show. So I'm going to call now on, should I continue using that same word? Our friend, I'll say our Dominican friend. We gave him citizenship for Dominica. I'm not sure how much he paid for that passport. Julian Rogers, to give his closing comment.
That's not a
Julian, you still with us? Yeah.
That's not a good subject to end it. Passport.
Journalists have thick skin, man. They can take anything from anybody.
Listen, well, all I can say is that I hope that a forum and a discussion like this would trigger some move of the media people in Dominica to come together. I know that they've been disparate sections over time, but this is not a time for people to run away from the responsibility really to Dominica. And let me assure you that there are many of your colleagues in the rest of the Caribbean who are ready to help you come together one more time. Because you have to be in a position where you appear to be unified, that you can be representative, that you can look after the interests of those who may be in one way injured and abused, etc. But I also think the coming together is really about developing and building your skills and talent and competence, which I think is really the heart of what we expect from media operators in our countries. Um, you know, the media landscape in Dominica is both a mix of government-owned and private sector and special interests and whatever else. I think really there needs to be a sit-down of all these stakeholders to come to a common position about their continued role in the democracy of Dominica. I think that is significant. And one of my great worries is that no one should pick up the fire rate that is going on in America, for instance, and think that is the kind of treatment of media that should be commonplace in our Caribbean. So let's hope that there's a fresh breeze that will blow through this particular situation, and that the media operators, the journalists in the country will feel far more confident and respected in carrying out their function. That, I think, is really what we need to achieve. Thank you again for the opportunity. Glad to make contact with some of my old buddies, and let's keep the home fires burning.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you very much for those kind closing comments. Before I call on the chairman of the ERC, Mr. Boston, just to again close with a few very brief remarks, 1 minute for the most, two. I just want to read, and we can't end without recognizing the number of persons who have been arrested, many of whom have been on bail for standing up during that March 19th on behalf of the citizens of Dominica. It would not have gone down well for us to end that program and not recognize them as patriots, as soldiers who stood up and took the rubber bullets and the tear gas, standing up to protect democracy in Dominica. The Electoral Reform Coalition considered to continue the arrest of decent citizens who exercise their right to demand legislation for free and fair election must stop immediately. Your Excellency, the President of the Commonwealth of Dominica must immediately set up an independent commission of inquiry to investigate the violation of human rights of protesters and the behavior of members of the Dominica Police Force with the use of unnecessary force under the command of Jeffrey James, who was 13 days later appointed to act Deputy Police Commissioner. The images of the action of the police on March 19th, which went viral on social media to the international community, has done much harm to the once perceived peaceful nature isle of the Caribbean. The Electoral Reform Coalition recognizes that the bills passed in Parliament on Wednesday, 19th March, are now the law of the nation, and recommendation and reconfirmation of voters will extend over a 15-month period. That is somewhere about June 2026. The ERC also understands that any general election called before the completion of the reconfirmation process will be done with the whole bloated, contaminated, and corrupted voters list. The ERC is therefore calling on all people of Dominica to be prepared to resist any general election before the reconfirmation process is completed. Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit has recognized the importance and the need for campaign finance regulation and has given a plethora of excuses, none of which make sense, why campaign finance regulations are not included in the toolkit. The Electoral Reform Coalition is therefore calling on the government of Dominica to immediately put the mechanism in place to prepare campaign financing legislation for presentation to Parliament before the next general election. So Dennis Byron has already prepared the draft legislation. All that is needed is consultation with the opposition forces, civic organizations to agree on the content of the legislation. It is therefore the expectation of the ERC that all political parties will prepare for the next general election on a level playing field with effective campaign financing regulations and a cleansed electors list. Though the reconfirmation process will still give the Dominica Labour Party an unfair advantage, the ERC is committed to cooperate with the government of Dominica in resolving the vexing issue of electoral reform that continues to divide the nation. I will now call on the chairman of the ERC, Mr. Boston, to just give a brief closing remark. Mr. Boston.
Alvin, thank you again, and let me say thank you so much to the presenters and all those who have been on this meeting tonight. I think we had a very good education of the media and how the media and us must work together to preserve our democracy and, of course, to build a viable democratic society. All of us, the various operators in society, must be engaged. And Julian made the point that one must respect the other. And in Dominica, quickly, the institutions of government are falling apart in the sense that when you apply to the police for any activity, either to inform them or for permission, the first thing you get from the chief of police and the Minister of National Security is that they turn our application on the radio into like we are planning violence. And they give an impression either to keep people from coming out, but it doesn't augur well for the society. Another thing too, I can quickly say that we had applied to have a match. We applied well in a month. And then we had to postpone because of some other activities happening. And we wrote to them again and give them sufficient time. And when we got the permission from the police, it was about 12 midday, the day of the event. 12 midday, the day of the event. So therefore, it created a certain level of distrust, and the level of professionalism has been really going to the dogs. And I think if these things can be remedied, we can of course build a society understanding that the government has a role, the opposition has a role, the media has a role, the entire society has a role to ensure that we build a viable democratic society for the benefit of every citizen at home and abroad. So I want to thank us tonight for this night. I think we had a very good night, and I am sitting there listening. I can tell you, my night was not wasted. I learned quite a lot, and I want to wish the media well. And I think his team, or who made the point earlier on, that I think his team, yes, that the media will not always like what the media put out, but once they put out the truth, that's what matters.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they cannot really please everybody, and they are not supposed to operate as one-sided. They will operate as a fair and independent media in the society. So sometimes we don't like what they put, but once the truth is reported, I think we should be big men and women enough to appreciate it. So again, thank you so much, and God bless all of us. And God bless the work we're doing, and bless our country and our Caribbean region. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boston. Thank you very much. And it's just left for me now to say the final thank you to all the panelists who have presented this evening, and all of you who have stayed with us throughout the night. Those who made a contribution, Sister Rosie, and the young journalist who's still here with us. All of you who've been listening via the social media page, thank you very much, and you continue to have a good weekend. Thanks again to Q95, Push Past 10, TNO, Nick We Talk, and TDNRadio.net. Thank you guys, and let's go ahead and save our country, Dominica. We all have a role to play. Let's get there and get it done.
Thank you and good night. Good night, everyone.
Boy, I had a dream. Boy, once I had a dream. Politicians hold significant power to shape the future for you and me through the right decisions, policies, and leadership. They can either empower the young people or create barriers that will stifle our ambition and potential to be the best we can be. So, Mr. PM, what's going on? The more we try and try, we still staying down. You created an illusion, an imagination of a bright, prosperous, wealthy nation. Some call you a mama Gaia, I call you a heartbreaker and a dream killer. We had plenty hope, but now we can't cope. You're a dream killer. Disregard our mental health while you busy meant a lot of things. We believed in you. No our life passing by, nothing coming through. Made a lot of promises, fulfilling a few. Then this big celebration for us to praise you.